The wedding invitations went out to everyone in my family, except me, the groom's real wife, and then. It had been 6 long years since I last stood on the sun-baked porch of my childhood home, and as I pressed the doorbell with a shaky hand, the setting Tucson sun cast long shadows across the walkway behind me, reminding me of how far I'd come and how far I'd left behind. My mother opened the door faster than I expected, her posture stiff, expression unreadable, and voice just a little too clipped when she said, "Sadie, you're here." Like my return was an inconvenience she had to endure, not a relief. She looked older than I remembered, lines dug deeper into her face. But her signature painted lips and carefully curled hair suggested her obsession with appearances hadn't changed one bit. We embraced briefly, but even in that short contact, I could feel the years of silence standing between us like a brick wall. Without a word about how I'd been or what my life looked like now, she turned and walked into the living room, leaving me to drag my suitcase in behind her like a stranger. Nothing in the house had changed. Same worn-out couch, same lace curtains. Even my father's battered leather recliner still sat in front of the television, unmoved since his funeral 3 years ago. It made my skin crawl with a strange nostalgia and unease, as if I had walked into a frozen memory that refused to thaw. I asked about my younger sister, Nenah, and Mom answered without turning around, saying she was out running errands and would be back eventually, like I had asked about the weather or the mail. There was no warmth in her voice, only something clipped and forced. Trying to ease the tension, I talked about my life back in Portland, about the design firm I'd built from scratch, the big projects we'd landed, the city skyline I had helped shape in ways most people would never know. I even mentioned Gavin, my husband, and how he'd been traveling more lately for work, helping pitch our services to high-end commercial clients. None of it seemed to land. My mother offered little more than a polite smile and a half-hearted, "That's nice," before disappearing into the kitchen to make coffee. Her back was rigid, her movements mechanical, and I could feel something roiling beneath the surface, something she wasn't saying, something I wasn't supposed to ask about. When I left for Portland 6 years ago, right after a screaming match with Dad about abandoning the family, I thought maybe time would heal it. But even after his death, the silence had remained, and now it felt like it had grown fangs. I hadn't come back just for a visit. I'd come because something in my gut told me I needed to. I hadn't even told Gavin about the real reason. How the distance between me and my family had started gnawing at me after all these years. How I wanted to at least try to make peace, or find out if there was anything left to salvage. When Mom came back from the kitchen, she handed me a chipped ceramic mug and stared pointedly at the ring on my finger. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, and without warning she asked, "Are there problems between you and Gavin?" Her voice was calm, but the question landed like a slap. I blinked, caught off guard, and said no, there wasn't anything wrong. At least, nothing I knew about. She just nodded and said, "That's good," with the kind of forced sincerity that made me wonder if she'd heard otherwise. Then she changed the subject so abruptly it made my head spin, standing up and telling me she'd kept my room the same and I should go get settled. Upstairs, the moment I opened the door to my old bedroom, I felt like I'd stepped into a museum exhibit curated by someone obsessed with teenage memories. Posters still on the wall, trophies from debate team and cross-country lined up on the dusty shelf. The comforter still the same faded purple pattern. I let my bag drop to the floor and stared out the window toward the backyard, where the peach tree my dad and I planted when I was 10 had grown tall and wild, like it had been thriving without anyone to prune it. When I turned around, Nenah was standing in the doorway. She looked the same but smaller, like a version of herself pulled tighter and quieter. We hugged, and for a moment it felt real, like nothing had changed. But then I saw it, the flicker of nervousness in her eyes, the way her smile faltered just before she looked away. "I wasn't sure when you'd get here," she said, stuffing her hands in her pockets, as if her fingers might give away whatever she was hiding. "No worries," I replied, still holding back my 1,000 questions. "Anything new with you?" She shrugged and said not much, just work and the usual, but the answer was too fast and the tone too flat. I didn't press. Not yet. We made our way downstairs, where we helped Mom finish prepping dinner. Something simple and nostalgic. Baked chicken, mashed potatoes, and overcooked green beans. The conversation stayed on the surface, gliding over safe topics like the weather, traffic, and the new shopping center they built where our high school used to be. I noticed Nenah barely ate, and my mother avoided eye contact every time I tried to steer the conversation toward anything remotely personal. I was drowning in the artificial politeness of it all, like we were actors in a poorly written play about a happy family reunion. Later that night, while Mom was in the shower, I went into her room to leave a sweater I had borrowed from her suitcase. The room was immaculate, as always, but when I went to lay it on the bed, I knocked over a folder from her nightstand. Papers spilled across the floor, and I instinctively knelt to pick them up before I noticed the cover of one booklet. It was a glossy wedding planner. Confused, I flipped through it and found an invitation mock-up for a wedding at the Desert Vale Resort, one of the most expensive places in the state. There, printed neatly in gold letters, was the bride's name, Nenah, and the date, just 2 weeks from now. My breath caught in my throat. Why hadn't anyone told me? Why hadn't Nenah told me? Before I could piece it all together, I heard my mother's voice, sharp and furious, from the doorway behind me. "What are you doing in here?" I stood up slowly, the folder still in my hand. "Is Nenah getting married?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "That doesn't concern you," she snapped, rushing forward and yanking the documents from my hands. "Don't you dare show up. This has nothing to do with you." Her eyes were blazing, but behind the fury I saw something else: fear, guilt. How could it not concern me? I said, stepping back. "She's my sister. I'm her sister. Why wasn't I told?" "There are circumstances," she said, like that explained anything. "It's better if you stay out of it. We'll talk in the morning." I didn't sleep. I lay awake with my mind spinning in 1,000 directions, thinking about Gavin, thinking about Nenah, thinking about that wedding invite and the glaring omission of my name. The only person who might tell me the truth now was Gavin. I called him twice and got voicemail. On the third ring, he picked up, his voice sounding tired and distracted. "Hey, Sadie, you at your mom's place?" "I am," I said carefully. "Did you know Nenah is getting married in 2 weeks?" A pause, just long enough to confirm what I already feared. "Really?" he said. "That's surprising. Mom told me not to come," I added, waiting for him to say something. Anything, to reassure me. But he didn't. Instead, he said he had a big meeting the next day and might be hard to reach for a while, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. The next morning, the smell of brewed coffee drifted up from the kitchen, but I didn't go down right away. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened the night before. I kept replaying Mom's voice in my head, cold and commanding, telling me to stay out of Nenah's wedding like I was a stranger looking to crash someone else's life instead of her eldest daughter. When I finally went downstairs, the table was already set and both Mom and Nenah were pretending everything was normal, like last night hadn't happened, like they hadn't just tried to erase me from something as major as a family wedding. "Morning," Nenah said, overly cheerful as she flipped a pancake. She avoided eye contact, which only confirmed that she knew exactly what I'd found. I sat down slowly and asked, "So where are you headed today?" Pretending I didn't already know her work schedule. "Just errands," she said, her voice tight. "A few things around town. Nothing important." Mom jumped in immediately, too fast, telling me we'd have dinner together again and maybe catch up properly afterward. I just nodded and watched Nenah grab her keys and practically run out the door like the walls might cave in if she stayed 1 second longer. The second she left, I turned to Mom, who was already gathering dishes to avoid facing me. "Tell me the truth," I said quietly. "Why wasn't I invited? Why is my sister getting married in 2 weeks and I had to find out by accident?" She didn't turn around. "You're too busy," she said, her tone clipped. "Always in your own world. We didn't think you'd come. Didn't think I'd come, or didn't want me there." She finally faced me, but her eyes were hard. "It's complicated. You wouldn't understand." That was all she gave me. No details. No explanations. Just a carefully sealed vault of secrets that screamed one thing: stay out. I excused myself and went upstairs, my chest tight with frustration. I didn't want to believe the worst, but the fear was blooming fast inside me. Gavin had acted strangely ever since I told him I was visiting Tucson. He was distant, distracted, always on the phone with vague work updates. I needed someone who didn't lie to me. Someone who wouldn't tiptoe around whatever this was. That's when I thought of Aunt Meredith, Mom's younger sister who'd practically helped raise me when I was a kid and Dad was still shouting at walls. I called her immediately, and when she picked up, her voice was gentle and warm. "Sadie, honey, it's been too long." I didn't waste time. "Did you know Nenah's getting married?" There was a pause. Not long, but enough. I heard something, yes. And no one thought to tell me. "I don't know the details, sweetheart. Your mother said there were unusual circumstances." My blood ran cold at her choice of words. "What does that mean, Meredith?" She sighed. "I think you need to ask Nenah directly." I hung up more unsettled than before. If even Meredith was dodging the truth, then something was seriously wrong. Out of desperation, I called Talia, my best friend from high school. She and I hadn't talked much since I moved, but she always had her ear to the ground when it came to local gossip. "Sadie?" she answered, surprised. "Are you in town for Nenah's wedding?" The words hit me like a punch. "So it's true," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's she marrying?" Talia laughed. "Wait, don't you know? Just tell me." I whispered. "I think his name is Gavin. From Portland, right? Some kind of consultant or something." I didn't hear the rest. I dropped the phone. For a full minute, I sat there frozen, listening to the dial tone, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. It couldn't be true. It had to be another Gavin. There were hundreds of Gavins in the world. Thousands, maybe. But I already knew. Everything made sense now. His constant traveling. His vague excuses. His cold distance. My husband was marrying my sister. I called him again, shaking, nearly dropping my phone as I hit redial. Straight to voicemail. Again and again. I finally left a message. "I know. Call me now." No response. I paced the room like a caged animal, the weight of betrayal sinking deeper with every step. I couldn't sit still, couldn't think straight. I went into Nenah's room because I needed proof. I needed something to confirm that I wasn't imagining this. Her door was open. On her desk sat a velvet ring box, like she hadn't even tried to hide it. My hands trembled as I opened it. The ring inside was large, beautiful, platinum band, cushion-cut diamond. I knew it. I had seen it before. 3 years ago, Gavin and I walked past a jewelry shop in Seattle, and I pointed out that exact design, laughing about how ridiculously expensive it was. He told me he'd never buy something so extravagant. Now here it was, on Nenah's desk. I took the ring out and turned it in my fingers. Inside the band, an engraving, "Forever, GM. Gavin Miller." My legs almost gave out. I returned the ring carefully and walked back to my room like I was floating outside my own body. That evening, Gavin finally responded. A text. "What are you talking about?" No apology. No denial. No explanation. Just deflection. I didn't reply. I just started packing. I wasn't sure where I was going yet. Portland, maybe, or anywhere but here. Nenah came to my room as I zipped my suitcase. Her face was pale, and I could see the guilt on her like a second skin. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice small. "Yeah," I said flatly. "Urgent work stuff." She hesitated. "That's too bad." I almost screamed. "Too bad." That's what she had to say, but I kept my voice calm. "I'll be back in 2 weeks." Her eyes widened, just slightly. "Why?" "Just stuff. You know," I said, smiling tightly. She nodded, but her voice was hollow. "Nothing special happening then." I gave a cold laugh. "Of course not." That night, I flew back to Portland, but I wasn't running away. I was planning. 2 weeks later, dressed in black slacks and a dark blazer, hair tucked under a short wig, sunglasses hiding most of my face, I drove out to the Desert Vale Resort. I parked at the edge of the gravel lot and approached the garden terrace from the back trail, my heart pounding with every step. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw punches. I just wanted them to see my face. A staff member almost caught me, but I gave Talia's name, and when he found it on the guest list, he smiled and led me to the changing area. I slipped out quickly when no one was looking, weaving through the back corridors until I reached the edge of the venue. Hidden behind a row of palms, I saw them. The chairs, the flowers, my family. Mom was seated in the front row, dressed in blue, smiling proudly like she wasn't helping bury me alive. And then the music started. Gavin stood at the altar, straight-backed and radiant, looking like the happiest man alive. Then Nenah appeared in a mermaid-cut dress, veil pulled back just enough to show the beaming smile that had haunted my dreams for nights. I had wanted to wait until the officiant spoke. I had wanted to let them feel the moment before I tore it away. But I couldn't. I stepped forward. I object. Heads turned. Gasps. Then silence. I took off my sunglasses. Removed the wig. Gavin's face drained of all color. Nenah clutched her flowers like they might shield her. "That man," I said, pointing at Gavin, "is my husband." And just like that, the world caught fire. For a moment, no one moved. Not the guests, not my mother, not Gavin, not even Nenah, who stood frozen at the altar, her mouth slightly open like she'd forgotten how to breathe. I took another step forward, feeling every eye on me, the weight of judgment, confusion, disbelief, all crashing into the garden like a wave I'd been preparing to drown in. Gavin looked like someone had just ripped the ground out from under him, eyes wide, lips trembling as if searching for a lie that would land safely in this wreckage. I stared straight at him and said it again, louder this time, not for him, but for the dozens of people seated around us who had just watched a woman walk into a wedding and declare war. "That man is my husband. We've been married for 5 years." The words echoed like thunder through the flower-scented air, colliding with the delicate string music that had continued for a moment too long before someone finally cut it off. Nenah's bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the grass with a soft thud, but she still didn't speak. I looked at my mother then, and her face told me everything. She already knew. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't shocked. She was just mortified I'd exposed their secret in public. I didn't wait for anyone to give me permission to continue. I marched straight down the aisle, pulling the gold ring off my finger with slow precision, holding it up like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom built from betrayal. Gavin opened his mouth, but I beat him to it. "You've lied to me for months. You told me you had worked trips, meetings, late nights, whole stories to cover where you really were. But all along, you were here, in Tucson, planning this fairy tale wedding with my sister." With my sister. There were gasps again, low murmurs of disbelief from guests who had no idea what they were watching anymore. "You're misunderstanding everything," Gavin stammered finally, taking a step forward. "This isn't what you think. If we just talk." "Talk?" I laughed, and it came out sharp and ugly. "You had your chance to talk. You could have told me months ago. Hell, you could have at least had the decency to leave me before proposing to someone else. But instead you decided to marry my own sister behind my back like I'd just disappear into thin air." "I didn't plan for it to happen this way," he muttered, voice cracking under the weight of his own idiocy. "Of course you didn't plan it," I snapped. "Because that would have required some kind of moral backbone, which clearly neither of you have." I turned to Nenah, who still hadn't said a single word, her veil hanging loosely around her face, her expression pale and unreadable. "Say something," I demanded. "Tell me why. Tell me what I did to deserve this." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She took a step forward and then staggered slightly, her hand gripping her stomach like something inside her had twisted wrong. Gavin rushed to her side, but before he could reach her, she dropped to her knees on the grass, gasping for air. Aunt Meredith screamed. My mother lurched from her seat. Several guests stood in a panic. Gavin crouched beside her, shouting her name, asking what was wrong, but Nenah was barely conscious, her skin gone deathly pale, hands trembling over her abdomen. "She's pregnant," someone whispered behind me, and the world spun sideways. My knees nearly buckled, and I stumbled backward a few steps, gripping the edge of a chair to stay upright. Pregnant. My sister was carrying his child. Sirens wailed in the distance as someone called for an ambulance. I stood there, still frozen, watching Gavin carry Nenah in his arms toward the resort's main building while guests cleared a path. Everything felt like slow motion, my heart, my thoughts, the sound of my blood roaring in my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to wake up from whatever twisted nightmare I had just interrupted. But instead, I followed. At the hospital, the waiting room felt like a purgatory made of fluorescent lights, cheap tile floors, and a dozen people trying to pretend they weren't eavesdropping on a family implosion. My mother sat across from me, her hands wringing a tissue into pieces, eyes darting up at me every few seconds before quickly looking away. She hadn't said a word since the wedding. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. I sat completely still, staring at the wall clock, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. Nenah's collapse, Gavin's face when I said the words, the unbearable weight of knowing they had built an entirely new life on top of the ashes of mine. A doctor finally emerged, walking straight toward us with a calm expression and clipboard in hand. "She's stable," he told my mother. "The baby is fine, but we're keeping her overnight due to elevated blood pressure. The stress could be dangerous. Can we see her?" I asked before Mom could speak. "She's asking for family," he said gently. "You're welcome to speak with her briefly." I didn't wait. I stood up and walked to the room, unsure what I was even going to say. When I entered, Nenah was propped up in bed, and four in her arm, her face pale and streaked with dried tears. She looked at me and immediately started crying again. "Sadie," she whispered, "I'm sorry." I closed the door and stood at the foot of her bed, arms crossed, heart barely beating. "Why?" She shook her head, wiping at her eyes. "I never meant for this to happen. It just did. Gavin came here to visit you and you weren't around, and we started talking. I didn't think it would turn into anything." "You didn't think sleeping with my husband would turn into anything?" "I didn't mean to fall for him," she sobbed. "He told me things. He said you were always working, that you didn't care anymore, that your marriage was falling apart. I wanted to throw something. Of course he said that. He needed to justify his cheating to someone. And you believed him because it was convenient." She didn't deny it. I stepped closer, my voice shaking. "Did you ever stop to wonder why he never divorced me before proposing to you? Or were you just so desperate for a fantasy that you didn't care?" "I found out I was pregnant," she whispered. "I thought maybe this was supposed to be something new. Something real. He has no job," I said. "No business. I've been supporting him for over a year. I paid his debts. I funded that failed startup of his while he was planning a wedding with you." Her eyes widened. "He told me he was a consultant, that everything was going well." "Yeah, and I bet he told you I was cold, selfish, distracted. Maybe I was busy, but I was building something for us, and I never thought he'd destroy it with someone who shared my blood." She covered her mouth and started crying again, and I had nothing left to say. "You two deserve each other," I said finally, voice raw. "You lied. You betrayed me. I don't care how sorry you are. I will never look at you the same again." I turned to leave. At the door, I stopped and looked back one last time. "Take care of the baby. That's all I can wish for you now." And then I left the hospital room, walked down the sterile hallway, and didn't look back. Outside, the sun had started to set again, bathing Tucson in that same warm orange light I had seen the night I arrived. But everything felt different now, because now I knew exactly what I had to do. I was going to walk away from all of it. From Gavin. From Nenah. From the family that let this happen. This time, I wasn't just leaving home. I was leaving behind everything that had tried to bury me alive. I left the hospital without telling anyone goodbye, stepped into the desert air that burned hotter than I remembered, and walked to my car in a daze, feeling like I'd just crawled out of a burning building that was still collapsing behind me. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, and for a moment I couldn't even start the engine because everything that had just happened, the wedding, the collapse, the hospital, the lies, was still spinning around me like a storm I hadn't yet escaped. I sat there in silence for nearly 20 minutes before I could gather the nerve to drive away, my eyes dry, but my chest aching like I had been holding in a scream for days. When I got back to my rental house, the silence was suffocating. I dropped my suitcase in the middle of the hallway, collapsed onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling for hours, numb and empty, wondering how a life I thought was stable could have unraveled so violently without me ever noticing the seams fraying. The truth was, I'd been ignoring the signs for longer than I cared to admit. Gavin's distracted glances, his last-minute business trips, the way he stopped asking about my projects or bothering to share details about his own life. He'd already checked out of our marriage long before I discovered the truth. He just didn't have the spine to tell me. A few days later, I called a lawyer in Portland, one of the best in the city, and set up a consultation for the moment I got back. I wanted the process started before Gavin could even think of spinning the narrative in his favor. I wasn't going to let him manipulate the situation the way he had manipulated both me and Nenah. I also called my firm and told them I needed an extra week to sort out personal emergencies. But the moment I mentioned Gavin's name, my assistant's voice changed, like maybe she'd known something too, or at least suspected he wasn't who he pretended to be. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Gavin. I didn't answer. He called again that afternoon, and then the following evening, and each time I let it ring until it stopped, because whatever he had to say now didn't matter. After everything he had done, after tearing apart two families and lying to both of us, I had nothing left to hear. Then he showed up. I was sitting on the back porch drinking lukewarm coffee when I heard a knock at the front door, and I already knew it was him before I even stood up. I opened the door, and there he was, sunken-eyed, pale, trying to look remorseful, but still wearing that same half-smirk that used to charm me when we were in college, and I was too young to know better. "I just want to talk," he said. "You should talk to your fiancée," I replied, and started to close the door. "She's not my fiancée anymore," he said quickly, jamming his foot in the frame. I ended it. I opened the door just enough to look at him. "Why? Because she found out you're broke? Or because you realized being called out at your own wedding doesn't make you look like a man worth trusting?" He winced, but didn't leave. "I deserve that," he said. "But it's more complicated than you think." I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me. "Let me guess. You're going to say I drove you away, that I worked too much, that I wasn't emotionally available. Just say it. Finish the script you rehearsed." He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "You were gone a lot. And yeah, I felt like we weren't connected anymore. So you chose my sister?" I spat, voice rising. "You could have left. You could have had an honest conversation. Instead, you turned your infidelity into a goddamn wedding invitation." "I didn't know how to tell you," he admitted, finally looking me in the eyes. "And when I found out Nenah was pregnant, I thought, maybe it was too late to fix anything." I crossed my arms, fury boiling under my skin. "You don't get to talk about fixing anything. You detonated our marriage. You destroyed my relationship with my sister. You let my mother stand there and pretend like I didn't exist." "I didn't ask her to do that," he said weakly. "No," I said. "You just stood by and benefited from it." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry. It didn't land. It didn't even register as meaningful. I'm filing for divorce," I said. "You'll be contacted by my attorney next week. Don't call me again. Don't text. If you want to speak, do it through a legal channel." And then I walked back inside and closed the door, locking it behind me, as if the sound of that deadbolt would seal off the last 5 years of my life and give me some sense of control again. 2 days later, my mother called. I didn't want to answer, but something told me I needed to hear what she had to say. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know you hate me right now," she began, voice brittle, "but I need you to understand something." I said nothing. "I thought I was doing what was best," she said. "I thought if I could just get Nenah settled, maybe she'd stop making the wrong choices. She's always been fragile. You've always been the strong one." I almost laughed. "So your solution was to let her marry my husband?" "I didn't let anything," she said quickly. "It just happened. And when I found out, I didn't know how to handle it. I told myself you were busy with your life, that you wouldn't care, that I wouldn't care." I cut in, my voice rising. "That my sister and my husband were sneaking around behind my back and building a life without me. And you thought I wouldn't care?" "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting her. I didn't realize I was losing you in the process." "You didn't lose me," I said coldly. "You gave me away." She was quiet for a long time, and I knew she didn't have a response. I ended the call and packed my things that night. I flew back to Portland the next morning and stepped off the plane with nothing left to tie me to the life I used to live. Gavin wasn't waiting at the gate. Nenah wasn't calling. My mother wasn't trying to reach out again. It was just me, walking forward. I filed for divorce that week, and 3 months later, it was finalized. I signed the last paper with a clear head and a steady hand. And when I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel grief. I felt light. I took a job in New York 2 months later, at a design firm that offered me more responsibility, better pay, and a chance to create without someone else's drama hanging over me like a storm cloud. And for the first time in years, I finally started to breathe again. Spring in New York had a softness that Tucson never could offer, and sitting by the window of my favorite corner cafe near the park, I found myself sketching again, pen gliding over clean paper without hesitation, like my hand had finally remembered what it felt like to move freely. The sunlight stretched across the table, spilling golden light over the blank space where I had started a new concept for an upcoming interior project in Boston, one that I'd taken full creative lead on. I hadn't realized until that moment how much space betrayal had occupied in my mind, how much creativity it had stolen. It had been nearly a year since the wedding disaster, and though the memory still surfaced in sharp flashes, it no longer controlled the rhythm of my life. I'd left Portland for good 6 months ago, not just to escape the wreckage of a failed marriage, but to finally start building something just for myself, without compromise or distraction. The apartment I rented in Manhattan was small but filled with light, a space I'd carefully designed to reflect who I was now. Clean lines, warm tones, and not a trace of anything that reminded me of Gavin. "Mind if I sit?" came a voice, gentle but certain, and I looked up to see Milo, one of the lead architects from our firm, holding a coffee in one hand and a sketchbook in the other. I nodded with a smile, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. We'd worked on 2 major projects together over the past year and had developed an easy rapport, a quiet understanding built not on flirtation or forced small talk, but on mutual respect. There was something grounding about him. No hidden layers, no performative charm, just someone who showed up on time, listened when you spoke, and remembered the details that mattered. He leaned forward slightly, glancing at the sketch in front of me. "That for the Tremont job?" "Yep," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "We've got final approvals next week. I want to lock down the lighting grid before the presentation." He nodded, thoughtful. "It looks solid. Want to run through it together tomorrow?" "Sure," I said. "After lunch." He smiled and pulled out his calendar app, already setting the reminder. That was Milo, never dramatic, never vague. After months of chaos, that kind of consistency felt like a revelation. There were still things I hadn't fully faced, conversations left unfinished, apologies I hadn't responded to, emotions I hadn't unpacked. But I was moving forward, and that alone felt monumental. My phone buzzed as Milo stood to leave, and I watched his figure disappear into the bustle of the city sidewalk before looking down to see a new message. It was from my mother. She'd started reaching out again slowly, cautiously, like she knew there was a line she couldn't cross unless I let her. Her first messages were awkward, small check-ins and forwarded photos of local news events from Tucson. But this time, it was something different. Attached to the message was a scanned letter, handwritten, with the familiar rounded cursive that belonged to my sister. I waited until I was home before I opened it fully. "Sadie, there's no way to make this right, but I want to tell you that I am trying. I think about what I did every day, and I know it doesn't deserve forgiveness. Not yet, maybe not ever. I broke something sacred between us, and no apology will erase that. I just hope someday you can believe that I'm truly sorry. I lost the baby a few weeks after that day. Maybe it was the stress, maybe it was just fate, but the loss hollowed me out in a way I didn't expect. Gavin left 2 months later. I haven't heard from him since. I'm going to therapy now. I'm trying to understand why I made the choices I did, and how to become someone I wouldn't be ashamed of. I'm not writing this to beg for reconciliation. I just want you to know I think of you, and I regret everything. I hope you're happy now. I really, truly hope that. Love, Nenah." I didn't cry when I read it. I just sat in silence, absorbing the weight of it. The pain still there but muted, like an old scar that flared in the cold but no longer bled. A part of me had spent months wishing she'd hurt more, fall harder, feel the full depth of what she'd done. But now, Reading her words, I just felt tired. I didn't know if I'd ever forgive her. But for the first time, I didn't feel poisoned by the anger. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a drawer beside my desk, next to an old wedding photo I hadn't yet thrown away, though I no longer looked at it. 2 weeks later, I got another text from my mom. She's staying with me now for a while. She's better. Not healed yet, but better. She still hopes you'll call one day. Maybe one day I would. But not yet. That weekend, Milo and I went to a new exhibit at the Design Museum, a soft opening for members only, showcasing sustainable materials in modern architecture. We talked about lighting angles and glass curvature and how some projects fail because the people leading them don't understand human flow. Afterward, we walked through the park in the cool twilight, and he asked if I ever thought about starting my own firm. Maybe, I said, and meant it. He paused, then added quietly, "You know, I think you're the kind of person who could actually do it and not fall apart." I looked over at him and smiled. Yeah, maybe I am. As we passed the lake, lights reflecting off the water's surface, I realized I wasn't just healing. I was rebuilding. Not from scratch, but from strength I hadn't even known I had. Whatever came next, it would be mine, designed from the ground up, on my terms. Not a single piece of it borrowed. Not a single piece of it stolen.